So, if you've read the newest chapter of JJK, chapter 248, you'll know that Yuta has stepped onto the stage to kick off one of the most legendary battles we've ever seen. And that is a battle between the Queen of Curses, Rika, and the King of Curses, Sukuna. And while everyone believes that this fight has a fair shot at being the final and most intense battle that we've seen in all of JJK, as both the main character of the story and the character who was supposed to be the main character of the story before they were written out of being the main character of the story are now coming into battle against the final boss of the manga, kind of seems like the fight that would come at the end of a story. And it's coming kind of at the perfect time. See, the reason that I say that Sukuna is the final boss of JJK actually is chapter 248, because 1, Kenjaku is A, very clearly dead, and 2, because before Kenjaku died, he said that somebody would inherit his will. And while YouTubers like me tried to scramble to figure out what that meant, it was revealed in chapter 248 with the unveiling of the rule that allows for Megami, aka Sukuna, to complete the merger of Japan with Tengen, that the person who was going to inherit Kenjaku's will wasn't actually a person, but instead a cursed spirit, and that cursed spirit was the king of cursed spirits, Sukuna. And thus, there's no final scheme to try to get Kenjaku back to life, there's no body he's going to switch into, and Yuji is not gonna turn evil because Kenjaku is his mommy. The person who's going to inherit Kenjaku's will is Sukuna. It's plain and simple. Which means from Kenjaku's mouth straight to the devil's ears, Sukuna is the final boss of JJK. Which is appropriate. I mean, for as long as JJK has been happening, Sukuna has been hyped up to be the biggest bad. And while Kenjaku was definitely mixing things up in the background, Kenjaku played more of a role of Kabuto in the 4th Great Shinobi World War than Madara. That is to say that he put all the pieces in place and hit play. But Sukuna being crowned the final baddie and Yuta breaking onto the stage to kill that final baddie isn't the only important thing that happened in chapter 248. As also in chapter 248, we got to finally see that Wee's curse technique is in fact a teleportation technique, which is something that had been theorized about ever since the Mei scene in Shibuya. And on top of the fact that we've now confirmed what Wee's technique is, it was also revealed that his curse technique is being used to teleport injured sorcerers off the battlefield and directly to Shoko. At least that's what we believe. Now, mind you, all of these revelations came from Sukuna, who was making assumptions, and therefore to assume that Sukuna is being 100% accurate with all of these revelations is a bit of a stretch. But it is probably safe to assume that Wee and Karara are taking all these injured sorcerers to Shoko. Logically, that makes the most sense. Now, Sukuna made this revelation because Wee and Karara showed up to pick up the dead body of Higuruma. I personally don't think that Higuruma is dead. Not because I don't want him to be dead. Well, it's not like I don't want him to be dead, but I also don't really care if he lives. He's very much a middle-of-the-road character to me. And upon seeing this tag team pick up Higuruma, Sukuna made the revelation, oh, that's why Gojo's body disappeared earlier, which has completely reignited the vigor of the entire fan base into believing that Gojo is in fact still alive. In fact, this is the most fervent the It's Not Gojover movement has ever been. And honestly, it's probably my favorite wave of delusion that the JJK fandom has ever had, as the memes that have come out of Gojo with foggy eyes looking up and seeing you pull a blanket over his face to grab his reboot card have been very funny on TikTok. But I am, fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, not clouded by the fog of It's Not Gojover, and therefore I can look at events in JJK without bias, and understand that there inherently has to be a reason that Wee and Karara will put themselves in the line of danger in order to collect Gojo's body. But what is that reason? Well, the overwhelming share of opinion on the internet will tell you that it's in order to save Gojo's life, and the other, more logical side of the internet may tell you it's in order to make sure that Kenjaku doesn't get Gojo's body. There is a third, smaller, quieter subsection that will tell you that Gojo's body was taken off the battlefield not to save his life and not to save his body from Kenjaku, but instead to harvest his eyes for one Yuta Okotsu. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, because today we're talking Yuta has inherited the 6 eyes. But before we get to shelling out the inheritance of a fake dead man, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you like the idea of me talking about all things is it or is it not Gojover, then you're gonna love my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And now that I'm saying that out loud, I now know I need to make a line of t-shirts that either says it is Gojover or it is not Gojover. And I'm gonna make sure that those t-shirts are made before you watch this video. So you can now pick up your It's Not or your It's Gojover t-shirt in my merch merch store, otakusanonymous.net, where you can find some of the greatest anime t-shirts, sweatshirts, and sticker packs known to man. Yeah, that'll put you on the clock, Cody. So, the fandom has recoalesced. They've reignite their fervor to believe that Gojo is still alive and kicking. Because if anybody's going to be able to save Gojo's life, it's a 12-year-old boy with a teleportation technique and a smoking medical professional. Smoking in two senses of the word. But here I am, the Scrooge of the JJK community, here to tell you that I believe the reason that Wee collected Gojo's body was not to save his life. It wasn't even because Wee and Kurara believed that they could save his life. And the real reason that I believe that Wee and Kurara decided to collect Gojo's body is because they learned from their mistakes with Geto. They realized that leaving incredibly powerful bodies kicking around was a really good way for Kenjaku to become the strongest dude in the history of dudes. However, I'll freely admit that I don't love that explanation, because obviously the remaining Jujutsu sorcerers, or what I call the Kusakabe Coalition, not only had a plan to kill Kenjaku, but also super had his location, as they were able to not only get Takaba to Kenjaku, but also get Yuta there. And therefore, if the Kusakabe Coalition knew Kenjaku's location, then they should have been at least 99% certain that he was nowhere near Gojo's body. And thus, since Kenjaku is truly just one brain, if Kenjaku was nowhere near Gojo's body, there's no way he could have transferred into Gojo's body. But they couldn't take the chance of one of Kenny's cursed spirits scooping up Gojo's body to bring to Kenny at a later date. Thus, if they had let that happen, then Kenjaku would have been able to switch into Gojo really whenever it was convenient. And that is quite literally the end of the world. That's GG's, nothing else happens, goodbye, good night Japan, and probably everywhere else. And thus, while I do admit that the It's Not Gojo overstock is as high as it will ever be, and that stock raise is justified, I still don't think Gojo is alive. I think there's a lot of other good reasons that they would collect his body. I mean, come on guys. He literally went to the afterlife. He saw all his dead friends, had a chat with him, and then we smash cut to Gojo's very unalive looking body. And if Nobara still hasn't bounced back from death, I'm sorry, I don't think it's happening for Gojo. If I don't get my favorite character back, neither do you. Not to mention that Sukuna in chapter 248 gave us the exposition that Shoko should be at best able to heal Gojo at half the efficiency that Gojo could heal Gojo. And speaking of half, that's what Gojo is in. So getting to Shoko really doesn't mean all that much. But this doesn't mean that Gojo's usefulness is over. In fact, far from it, as Gojo may still be able to help the Kusakabe Coalition from the grave. See, what if the real reason that Gojo's body was collected wasn't to save him from Kenjaku or save him from death, but instead
to harvest his organs.
But not like all his organs, because most of those are on the ground, his eyes. See, this theory comes from an employee of a card shop in Kentucky who for some reason knows that my editor works for me, and therefore passed this theory to my editor who passed it to me. So if you don't like it, it's not mine. I am just giving it a voice. And I did a fair amount of research on it and built it out, but don't worry about that. See, I was very vocal in my chapter 248 breakdown that I didn't believe that Yuta has the strength required to beat Sukuna in a fight, and thus I believed that in this battle, most likely Rika would die, which would leave Yuta relatively crippled in terms of a power sense, but while Sukuna was killing Rika, that would leave an opening for Yuji to land some kind of killing or crippling blow on Sukuna, because that's just kind of how Gegekatami writes. If somebody pops into a battle against Sukuna, they're gonna die, but it gives Yuji an opportunity to stab him. It literally just happened. But a lot of people believe that my ideology that Yuta stands no chance in a battle against Sukuna is a bit misguided, because after all, Yuta is the second most powerful person in the Kusakabe Coalition, right? Well, now the first most. And on top of that, Sukuna no longer has access to Maharaga or the other one. I forget what its name was. It was a combination of a bunch of different Shikigami from the 10 Shadows. I forget. And thus, really, when it comes down to it, Sukuna no longer has access to any of the 10 Shadows techniques that would make a real difference against somebody like Yuta, or Yuji for that matter. Because after Shikigami is tamed by a 10 Shadows user, if it dies, it's gone forever.
But Mick, you say, Sukuna killed Maharaga in the Shibuya incident.
Yes, Sukuna did kill Maharaga in the Shibuya incident with his fire arrow. And yes, Maharaga did come back after that death, but that death was in a subjugation ritual, where the literal goal of the 10 Shadows user is to kill the Shikigami they're battling against in order to subjugate it. But if a Shikigami of the 10 Shadows technique is subjugated and then dies after being subjugated, then they are gone forever. That's why Megami only had one demon dog after the other was killed by the Finger Bearer early on. And yes, if Sukuna didn't have the 10 Shadows, then Gojo would have violated him, and therefore the Sukuna that Yuta is fighting against should be technically weaker than the Sukuna that Gojo fought against. Except This Sukuna has 4 arms and 2 mouths, which makes doing hand signs and chanting a whole lot easier for this version of Sukuna than the Megami version of Sukuna. But even before Maharaga or any of the 10 Shadows technique Shikigami came out in the battle against Gojo, Yuta watched Gojo and Sukuna have a battle and realized, oh, they're out of my league, as both Gojo and Sukuna were doing things that Yuta didn't even know were possible with cursed energy, like using reverse curse technique on their brains in order to rejuvenate their cursed techniques after the fry that comes after using your domain expansion. So once again, my hypothesis for how this fight would pan out is that Rika and Yuta would put up a good fight against Sukuna but lose, leaving an opening for Yuji to kill Sukuna. But that may no longer be the case, because there is a possible power-up for Yuta in the wings, and that power-up would be the 6 eyes. Wait, we're gonna switch eyes? What is this, Naruto? Kind of. See, it was established, somewhat unnecessarily I might add, in Chapter 0 that Gojo and Yuta are distantly related. And while one could argue that this was added in order to add the exposition and explanation as to why Yuta was so powerful, or possibly why Gojo was invested in making sure that he was raised amongst the Tokyo Jujutsu High, this means that Yuta is a distant relative of the Gojo clan. Now, does this make him a member of the Gojo clan? No. But does it mean that he's more genetically similar to Gojo than basically everybody else on Earth? Yes. And if Gojo and Yuta have enough genetic similarity, then there is a possibility that Yuta could be a close enough genetic match to possibly be a host of the 6 eyes. But why would they do this? Well, because Gojo is dead, with 2 incredibly powerful weapons locked into his face. And before somebody tries to say,
Oh, but the 6 eyes are a jujutsu technique, not actual eyes.
No. They are actual eyes. They are an innate gift rarely inherited by members of the Gojo clan. They are classified as a jujitsu trait, not a jujitsu technique. And thus, the 6 eyes are physical. And Gojo, who's no longer breathing, no longer needs them. Therefore, we transported Gojo's body to a place that the 6 eyes could be extracted. Shoko. And Shoko removed the 6 eyes from Gojo's face in a way that would allow them to be transplanted into somebody else's face. And that somebody else is Yuta, who could almost definitely use a power boost for the fights to come. Now, well, yes, I'm aware we've seen Yuta's eyes in Chapter 248, and they are most definitely not the eyes of Gojo. The theory isn't saying that this has happened yet. What the theory does say is that it will happen sometime in the not so far off future. Because really, when it comes down to it, what is Yuta's biggest problem? Cursed energy expenditure. Even Gojo freely admits that Yuta has more cursed energy than him, possibly more cursed energy than anybody alive. In fact, really, when it comes down to it, the only person who has a comparable amount of cursed energy to Yuta is the person Yuta is currently fighting against. However, Yuta also burns a ton of cursed energy in his fights, as Yuta will rip through techniques that he's copied from other people, like the ability to grab space and bend it, or curse speech. However, Yuta won't use these techniques in a small, insignificant kind of way. Yuta uses these techniques at the peak of their usability, and in order to do that, you need a lot of cursed energy. And therefore, even though Yuta has more cursed energy than Gojo, Yuta would always run out of cursed energy first, because Gojo, through the usage of the 6 eyes, was able to limit his cursed energy usage to an infinitesimal amount. That is to say that Gojo could have the least amount of cursed energy out of anybody in the entire universe. But through the usage of the 6 eyes and his reverse curse technique, he was able to make sure that any curse technique he used an almost 0 amount of cursed energy, including his reverse curse technique. And because his reverse curse technique also used next to 0 cursed energy, Gojo was able to constantly be running reverse curse technique to cure any possible strain that the constant usage of 6 eyes would do to him. And thus, because of this, Gojo's 6 eyes and Limitless were constantly running. But since he was essentially the cursed energy version of a perpetual motion machine, that didn't mean anything. Now, in Gojo's fight against Sukuna, there was concerns that he was going to run out of cursed energy, as he had never been pushed before like he was being pushed in this battle against Sukuna. And therefore, people believed that his efficiency was dipping and he was cutting into his cursed energy. So that is to say that when Gojo was pushed to his absolute limit, he wasn't able to maintain his perfect efficiency. And now, if Yuta were to inherit the 6 eyes, we should probably assume at least the same thing about him. Because if hypothetically Yuta were to inherit the 6 eyes somewhere in the middle of a battle against Sukuna, he definitely wouldn't master them immediately. I mean, Yuta is a genius who has a copy ability, and therefore mastering a technique that gets given to him somewhere in the middle of a battle isn't anything new to him. It's probably probably insane to say that Yuta would be able to achieve Gojo's level of mastery with the Six Eyes in a matter of minutes. But we do have to take into account his copy ability here, because Yuta, when it comes down to it, is probably the most adaptable fighter in all of JJK, and therefore if anybody would be able to get a brand new ability in a battle against Sukuna and figure it out well enough to use it against him, it'd be him. And not to mention, if Yuta were to receive the Six Eyes, with his massive cursed energy reserves that are apparently greater than that of Gojo, even if his efficiency did dip, he would last longer than Gojo. Not to mention that Yuta's reverse curse technique is as good as Gojo's or Sukuna's, and while using it might take more cursed energy for him than it does for Sukuna or Gojo, if he were to hypothetically have the Six Eyes, he would be able to use it more efficiently, and therefore by inheriting the Six Eyes, Yuta could also possibly enter into the perpetual motion machine type ability that Gojo had. However, instead of needing to maintain the Limitless, he would simply need to feed his copy ability, which he would now be able to use at a much more efficient clip. And thus essentially what we're talking about here is a man with the ability to copy any curse technique he sees and use it at the same level of power as the person he's fighting, but at a more efficient cursed energy burn. And therefore, in a hypothetical battle against Sukuna, if Yuta were to inherit the Six Eyes, he could copy things like Cleave or Dismantle and use them better than Sukuna. And while it may not be the best idea for Yuta, the possibilities we're talking about here are almost endless. And while that might sound like pure fan fiction, there is a very specific story told by Kenjaku that might give some credence to this theory. See, as we all know, the Six Eyes are inherently tied to the Star Plasma Vessel. That is to say that every single time that a merger comes along and Tengen needs a Star Plasma Vessel to merge with, there will always be a Star Plasma Vessel alive to merge with and a Six Eyes user to get that Star Plasma Vessel to Tengen. And we know this because of Kenjaku, because we know at some point in Kenjaku's 1,000-year life, he was defeated twice by two separate users of the Six Eyes. And surprise, surprise, he didn't take that super well. So Kenjaku didn't take any chances, and he killed the next inheritor of the Six Eyes while they were a child. Actually, while they were an infant. They were 1 month old. And to double down on this, he also killed the Star Plasma Vessel. However, because Kenjaku is tied into cursed energy, and Tengen is kind of the center of all cursed energy in Japan, on the day of the merger, both a new Six Eyes host and a Star Plasma Vessel were both born. And therefore, the only reason that the merger didn't happen in the hidden inventory arc is because Toji is the person who kills the Star Plasma Vessel, and Toji has broken free of cursed energy, and therefore Tengen's wiggity-woogity rules don't apply to Toji. But Sukuna has not broken free of cursed energy, and yet Sukuna was the person to kill the Six Eyes user. And since Sukuna is trying to merge all of Tengen with Japan, technically, today is the day of the merger, which means that there should be a Six Eyes user on Earth, and that Six Eye user might just be Yuta, and thus Sukuna will learn the same lesson that Kenjaku learned hundreds of years ago, and that is that it doesn't matter if you kill a Six Eye user, they always come back. But okay then, why doesn't Yuta have Gojo's eyes yet? Well, probably because not all that much time has passed since Gojo died. Like, at most, it's been 10 minutes. Because after Gojo was slashed, all but immediately, Kashimo rushes in. Kashimo is killed in what, 30 seconds? Maybe a minute? After that, Yuji and Higuruma jump in. And sure, Higuruma activates his domain expansion, but they get the guilty verdict in what, 35 seconds? And Higuruma then battles against Sukuna for like at most 3-4 minutes. Oh, and then there's Chozo and the Shiesty Sorcerer battling against Sukuna there for like 45 seconds. And now we're here, where Yuta bursts back onto the scene. So even if we picked up Gojo's body the second it hit the ground, extracting Gojo's Six Eyes and getting them to Yuta, who was off assassinating Kenjaku, would have been a pretty Herculean task. But considering Yuta's outrageous reverse curse technique, swapping eyes, for him at least, should be about as easy as it was for Madara in the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. And therefore, what I'm hypothesizing is that Yuji will give Yuta a minute whenever Wee shows up on the battlefield in order to give Yuta the Six Eyes. And thus, even though the Six Eyes user has been killed, they come back to haunt their killer, because no merger can be done with Tengen without a Six Eyes user present, which I'm just now realizing could also be a really, really good point to argue that Gojo's not dead. But you could also technically very easily make the argument that the second that Toji kills Riko, that entire cycle is over. So genuinely, who are we to say? And listen, I fully acknowledge the fact that this theory is somewhat delusional, but I'd like to reestablish the fact that this theory is not my own. And it's also a whole lot more imaginative than the 300,000 other people trying to theorize on how Gojo is coming back to life. And let's not sit here and act like you couldn't use half the points I just elucidated to prove that Gojo is gonna come back to life. And listen, Because I know people are gonna be like, oh, Nick, you love Gojo. Why don't you want him to come back to life? I do want Gojo to come back to life. Everybody who reads JJK wants Gojo to come back. He's my king. But I move through the stages of grief faster than you all. I'm far out of denial. I'm well into acceptance. But that goddamn victim wee is getting my hopes back up again, and I am slowly but surely being pulled back into the grasp of denial. God, I want this story to be over. That's not true, but by heart. Anyways, what do you guys think's going on with Gojo's body? Do you think he's coming back to life? Do you think his body was just collected to make sure it wasn't collected by Kenjaku? Or do you think he's being harvested for his organs? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Buy the t-shirts.